can't name a single stasis primary that I'm a fan of, and quite honestly, I can't really name a lot of stasis weapons that I'm a fan of that don't have the perk Chill Clip on them. And if they do have Chill Clip on them, well, I'm only using them because of Chill Clip. There's very little stasis weaponry in my vault. Outside of Chill Clip weapons, the only stasis weapon I know that I probably use is Aegir Scepter. And to be fair, that's kind of just Chill Clip, the exotic. Legendary primary ammo stasis weapon is borderline useless, and it doesn't offer anything that a kinetic weapon couldn't offer as well. Now, for heavy weapons, elements typically don't matter unless you're something like a machine gun or a sword. In this case, a stasis sword is arguably pretty good, but it won't make or break the type of content I'll be able to complete. And to be fair, no element really provides that. However, a solar weapon with heal clip and incandescence is definitely a lot more noticeable than having headstone, rhyme stealer primary, or secondary for that matter. We don't really have any chill clip, rhyme stealer secondary weapons that are pretty prominent at the moment, nor do I think we will anytime soon. However, stasis weapons just lack. In this video, I want to talk about why this is and some ideas on how we could fix this. Let's talk about stasis perks, starting with headstone. I believe headstone is the first of all these perks to come out, and what it does is pretty simple. A precision kill creates a large stasis crystal at the target's location. It's pretty basic, nothing too out of the ordinary of a perk. However, it is inconvenient to use, especially on a weapon that may be full auto or has a weird reticle to it. It can be annoying to land those headshots, especially when the headshot needs to be a final blow. Now, comparing this to something like Firefly, headstone doesn't really do much for you. Firefly does a large solar explosion and enables extra reload speed on a kill. For headstone, you create the crystal, but you need to actively shoot it again for it to actually do something, which requires a lot more ammo than something like Firefly. Now, honestly, I don't think it should be an instant explosion. However, I feel like the perk should play in on itself. In its current state, you spawn a large stasis crystal on a precision kill, which I think is a great idea. However, what if we added more to it? Final blows generates a small stasis crystal at the target's location, and precision final blows creates a large stasis crystal at the target's location. Destroying crystals spawned via headstone returns ammo to the magazine. And for simplicity, let's say 25%, because it'll roughly take maybe 2 to 3 bullets to break that headstone if you're not on a stasis subclass, which for a lot of weapons can be 25% of the magazine for something like a hand cannon or a scout. It is possibly larger for something like an SMG, which is a bullet hose sort of weapon, and this will massively improve its usage. In fact, I could see this being really wonderful with a weapon with subsistence on it. That's how I would fix my headstone issue. It requires so much of the player to play into that it doesn't really make it worth to be played at all. However, if you just tweak a few things, I definitely can see this being pretty stellar. Also, this trait has a cooldown on it, so it's not too horrible of a change given that this has a cooldown. Something like Firefly doesn't have a cooldown. The stabilizing rounds seemingly doesn't have a cooldown because you basically can constantly reproc that perk. Incandescence doesn't have a cooldown, so why should this? Never really made sense to me. Quite honestly, I don't think this perk really needs to change at all. I will say, however, I do think there needs to be a primary or bullet hose version of this trait, and it would work in a similar fashion to how destabilizing rounds currently works. On a weapon kill, targets will explode, inflicting slow to nearby targets. If a nearby target gets inflicted by your slow, for a few seconds you have glacial rounds. I think this is a pretty simple weapon perk idea. Obviously, you would have to make the slow pretty low number, maybe something like 10 per bullet, or make it 20 and have each proc of it proc every half seconds or 0.75 seconds, something to keep it in line with how current volatile rounds works in the game. Gets too out there to have something like this. The Edge of Fate preview, we do see there is a similar perk for solar weapons, where you can start scorching targets and building up to an ignition. Something like this for stasis could work if you meet a kill criteria prior. Slow is very powerful in PvP, so I don't want this to become too strong, because basically being able to fully negate your opponent's movement speed feels very bad, and then being able to completely freeze them feels even worse. Lastly, let's talk about Rhyme Stealer. Destroying a stasis crystal or defeating a frozen target with this weapon grants you Frost Armor. That in itself is pretty good. It's also a little bit inconvenient. If you compare this to any other of the get a buff to yourself for doing X and Y, this is actually the hardest one to proc. For Repulsor Brace, it is any void debuff. For Kill Clip, it is simply get a kill and reload. Technically, Bolt Charge is easier because all you need to do is get a singular kill and then hits build up the rest. And then becoming amplified makes it even better. Rhyme Stealer requires you to destroy a stasis crystal, which then now requires you to spawn in a stasis crystal and or defeat a frozen target. Now, I'm not saying that either of these are an impossible feat. However, if something is higher health, well, now that frozen that you just did on them doesn't really matter. And if you can't spawn a stasis crystal, that also doesn't matter at all either now. There's heavy weapons with this that don't do either of these. Cold Comfort has Rhyme Stealer on it. Why? Like, what is the point of it having Rhyme Stealer? So you can use it with Chill Clip? What? It shouldn't be this complex. In my opinion, if it just said shattering a frozen target with this weapon grants you Frost Armor, this perk would see a lot more play because you can easily proc that on a higher health target. If you kill a target, you can make it grant you more, or you can even just keep the stasis crystal part of this perk and have it grant you even more stacks. I'm not saying that this one necessarily needs a buff. However, it should be noted while we're talking about the other perks. Next, I want to talk about some stasis exotics, mainly Virgus Curve and Wicked Implement. I used to be a big hater of Virgus Curve because, quite honestly, I didn't really use it too much, so I couldn't really say that it was a good exotic. However, after using it for a while, it is pretty good. I do think, however, that its catalyst should have Rhyme Stealer at this point, or it should just have a built-in Rhyme Stealer. It perfectly flows with the entire idea of the perk. Its catalyst says freezing or slowing a target grants this weapon faster draw speed for a short period of time, which is good. But that's like every exotic bow's catalyst is just making it shoot faster or just some way to make it shoot faster, which, yeah, technically it is really good for bows, but also it's really boring that like this is what the pinnacle of bow catalyst can be. I definitely think Rhyme Stealer fits on this list, given that you're just constantly making stasis crystals. I mean, come on, it just makes sense, guys. Wicked Implement actually kind of solves the headstone issue that I was discussing earlier because you get to overflow your mag whenever you collect a stasis shard. I think that's really cool. In fact, I think it's so cool that I feel like that should be a perk on its own. I don't know if it necessarily just needs to be a stasis exclusive perk. However, I think a perk like, I don't know, what would you call this? Trophy Collector? Collecting an elemental pickup overflows the magazine or reloads your magazine. I think that would be a really cool perk. This could also get Rhyme Stealer, but it doesn't necessarily need it because if you're using this on a stasis subclass, picking up a stasis shard will get you Frost Armor. So it doesn't necessarily need it, but I would say it is still a pretty cool idea if it were to get it. Malevolum has always kind of confused me. I'm not saying that this is a bad weapon, but I'm kind of confused on why it is a stasis weapon out of anything. Nothing about it is stasis related. And I think that's kind of sad. I'm not saying that this needs a buff towards its stasis nature. However, I do think it should be noted that it doesn't do anything for you as a stasis weapon. And it does make sense because it is a primary ammo. You probably don't want it to instant freeze or cause slow in something like Crucible. Or the fact that it does nothing or like doesn't even have like Rhyme Stealer does kind of suck. Especially given I'm pretty sure Rhyme Stealer came out the season that this came out. Winterbite really just needs a catalyst. It's a pretty good stasis exotic. It'll be the last one that I talk about. I do think that this should probably get a melee damage buff if you have Frost Armor active. I think they'd be really cool for this. I do see this as being the pinnacle melee glaive weapon, and I think it should be treated as such, and playing into the stasis aspect of it really does make sense. This one's going to be a bit of a controversial take, but I think you should get an extra Penumbral Blast melee if you're using Winter's Guile. Even though Technically, this has nothing to do with Stasis because this is the Iron Lord Felwinter. I think because the word winter is in the name, they decided to make the Penumbral Blast automatically shatter, but also it's more of a convenience thing for it as well. I do think this should give you an extra Penumbral Melee Blast if you want to make this the Penumbral Blast exotic. Every time they update Ballador's Wrathweavers, I feel like it gets used less and less, because originally they used to give stasis weapons their own stacking buff, but then they got rid of it, and that was already niche in itself. And I think it even became more niche when you made it in a stasis exclusive exotic, because this doesn't really work well with Prismatic. If someone can prove me wrong, please go ahead and do so. Yo, can we bring this back to how it originally worked? It was a lot better. Not necessarily a stasis exotic, but a pretty cool exotic Precious Scars. I think this should be changed to where it gives you an elemental buff matching your subclass. While Restoration is great, I think if you could provide Void Overshield, Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or like Bolt Charger Amplified for your allies, I think that'd be really sick. Something I thought of. Can we give Icefall Mantles its surges back? Like, why did we have to take away the surges? This was sick. Earlier I said I didn't know why Cold Comforts got Rhyme Stealer, but now that I'm thinking about it, I can find the one use case for it, and it is this exotic right here. This actually grants you resistance to your explosives, so this could actually work with a bipod rocket that has Rhyme Stealer, which Cold Comfort happens to be. These charge rocket jumps give you Frost Armor, which will be even more DR, will give you more protection. While it would only really work with this season's artifact, I think this could be a really cool exotic if we get more rocket-based armor. I know there's some explosive-based armor that gives you more movement speed coming into the Edge of Fate, and I kind of want to combine that with these. I hope these get some love in the future because they are pretty niche, but that's going to be it for me for now. What are your thoughts on the current state of Stasis Perks / exotics? I think the Stasis subclasses are pretty fine at the moment. Behemoth has a ton of total damage. Revenant Hunters have a lot of rotational and movement aspects to their subclass. And Winter's Wrath can lock down a room completely with turrets. So I don't think any of the subclasses really need any changes. I know a lot of people, if they were to change the subclasses, is to just give them another super and then have that super just be a damage super, which kind of blows in my opinion. I think that's kind of boring and lazy, and I don't think every subclass needs to have a damage super. I think some subclasses are supposed to be a utility role, and quite honestly, I think Winter's Wrath is one of the best supers on Prismatic. If you know how to build it correctly, you can have it up all the time due to how roaming supers now behave nowadays. That's gonna be it for me. I'll see y'all later.